This is a compilation of all my true scary stories for June. These are not new stories. Cold and hungry. This story is long, but a sweet gem. I hope that you all enjoy it. My brother has been a trucker for years now, and when he first started, he naturally had many stories of his experiences traveling on the road. He also had many other stories from those who've been trucking long before him. One of these stories has always stuck with me, even after all of these years. It was a story that my brother had recounted from one of his trucking buddies who'd experienced this while traveling the roads of the lower southwestern area of the United States. For the sake of the story, we will call his friend Lewis. It was late evening, and Lewis was on the road on a deadline, as all truckers are, when he noticed a hitchhiker on the side of the road. He decided to pull over and offer the guy a lift, seeing as it was getting dark pretty fast. Once he had stopped and leaned over to open the door for the guy, he came into view. He saw a young Mexican man whose clothes were noticeably dirty and seemed to be overall unkempt. Side note, all the following exchanges and conversations were completely in Spanish, but I will be translating them into English. Lewis told the man, "Hey, you need a ride?" The young man replied, "I'm cold and hungry." Lewis, feeling awful bad, responded, "Well, come on up. I have some food that you can have here in the truck." The young man climbed in, and Lewis set off. Lewis made conversation with the man, and he found out that the man was from Mexico, and that he had come to the U.S. looking to reunite with his family and to find work. The man didn't say how far he was going, and Lewis didn't press too much yet, as you could see the man had been through a lot. After about 20 minutes of chatting, the stranger asked him about the food. Lewis waved his hand towards the curtain that opened into the back sleeper area. "Oh yeah, I almost forgot. I have some leftover food in a bag here. Help yourself." The young man pushed the curtain aside and slipped into the sleeper area while Lewis continued driving. After about 15 minutes of silence, Lewis called to the man, "Were you able to find the food? How is it?" There was no reply. Lewis shouted again, thinking maybe the man hadn't heard him for some reason. "Hey, you okay back there?" No reply. Lewis became alarmed. It was impossible that the man would not have heard him by now, and a thought crossed his mind that maybe the man had had a medical emergency. He had looked in bad shape, after all. Lewis decided to pull over as quickly as he could to make sure that wasn't the case. Once he found a spot, he pulled over and rushed into the sleeper area. He was astounded to find that the man was not there. The bag of food lay untouched. When telling the story, my brother said that Lewis swore that the man he had seen had been flesh and blood, but he now knows that the man had been a ghost, a phantom of one of the many souls that perish on the perilous journey from Mexico to the United States. The reason this story sticks with me is because, although I was born on this side of the border, I too am Mexican, and I believe it's important to give these lost souls a moment of recognition. Brandon Maldonado, an artist who is known for painting titled The Wetback, wrote a small poem that accompanied the painting, and I think that reading it is an appropriate way to end the story. Originally in Spanish, translated to English it reads, "I'm a person you never know. I didn't live. I just survived. I crossed the river in hopes of finding work and respect. They found my bones 17 miles from the U.S. border. They still haven't identified me." Confronted. As most people might know, I walk around town every day. I don't have a vehicle, and I very often have to walk into town for things. I've been doing that for 7 years in this town. I never really have issues with it. But for those who follow me for a while, I did put forth a few stories about scary walks home. Once I heard weird, rusty machinery noises, and I was followed by a shadowy figure. Another time, I was scared by someone hanging out in the dark woods. But other than that, I'm usually fine. There was a time when this truck drove by me, and one of the guys in the truck threw water at me and then flipped me off. And actually 2 times a car tried to hit me, one in a gas station. I had to kick it. So there are a lot of things that happen in this small little town that really shouldn't. On Monday of this week, I had to go shopping. I went to the Dollar Tree. There was a homeless man sleeping right by the door. I'm used to that, coming from Chicago. It is a little weird in a small town, but I didn't think twice about it. I bought my items and prepared to leave the store. I actually was nowhere near this homeless man. I put my earbuds in and went on my way. I began hearing this noise. It was someone yelling, "Hey!" really loud. I didn't pay attention to it at first because I don't really know anyone in this town. No one would be talking to me. After hearing it like 10 times, I finally turned around. The homeless guy was in the parking lot yelling at me. Well, I just ignored him. He had no reason to talk to me at all, but as I kept walking, he kept yelling, "Hey!" at me, and I heard it getting closer. Turning around, I found the guy was walking fast towards me. He began yelling, "Why are you trying to take my stuff?" "I never touched your stuff," I simply told him and turned back around. Well, that obviously pissed him off, and he began coming at me faster, and he was swinging his fist too. I took out my cell phone. "If you don't turn around now, I'm going to call the police," I informed him. My first instinct in a fight is to leave. I do not like being violent. Yes, I am a martial artist and a former wrestler, but that's different. "I'm gonna fucking kill you," he yelled at me as I was walking. I turned around and he was coming at me fast. Quickly, I put myself in the beginning stance for a high-end showdown. I will leave a link in the description so you can watch and know what that means. "I'm not scared of you," I told him, and he was like, "You better be." The guy stopped there, but he kept yelling at me, but the stance gave him pause, I guess. He kept verbally assaulting me, and accused me of stealing from him. "You better never come down this road again," he told me and turned around, and at this point I got very, very angry. "I will go anywhere I damn well please, you asshole," I responded. He turned and came at me again, "And I'll kill you if you do." He kept swinging his fists, but he didn't get close enough to hit me. I maintained my stance and waited for him to do something. Finally, he turned around and went back to the Dollar Tree, screaming at me the whole way. Now, my first thought was just to go home, but by this point I was pretty pissed off. I don't like my integrity being questioned by anyone. I called the police. After talking for a while, 3 cops pulled into the parking lot. I walked to the liquor store because I have a friend who works there, and we watched. I don't know what happened, but they were there for 40 minutes, and I haven't seen the man since. Hopefully he found a home, and it's jail. You know, I have the ultimate sympathy for homeless people. As most people know, I was a teenage runaway, and I was homeless several times in my life. But this has nothing to do with him being homeless. I would have called the police on a rich person, too, if they had acted that way to me. And see, the weirdest thing is, this happened to me the very day after I posted a runaway video with homeless teenagers. The Cracking Man. I've never had to shorten my experiences and tell them in detail, so forgive me if I come across like I'm rambling. My family has, for as long as I remember, been terrorized by an entity we call the Cracking Man. My first encounter with him personally was when I was 5 years old. I woke in my room, and as my eyes adjusted to the darkness and the shadows formed from the moonlight beaming through the window, I noticed movement. I held my breath and tried to focus. In the abyss of the darkest corner of my room was a blackness that seemed to swallow all light and was blacker than everything else in the room. Then the sound began. At first it reminded me of bubble wrap. Then I imagined it was the sound of someone grinding their teeth to the point they were cracking and popping and crumbling under the force and pressure. All the hairs on my body began to rise, and the last bit of air in my lungs was forced out in a half gasp and a petty attempt at a scream, which failed miserably. Emerging from the blackness was a tall, dark man. Well, it resembled a man, but it was in no way human. Its bones crumbled as it jerked, limped, and twitched towards my bed. The sound it made with every footstep resembled what I imagined a butcher's sound like, hacking through meat, bone, and cartilage. Its body was mangled and broken, almost beyond recognition, but it still limped closer and closer, and then its face came into view. It stood swaying side to side, pressing against the bottom of my bed. It raised a long, spindly arm towards me, and its wrist and hand hung limply. As it raised its hand and extended its finger to point at me, I could hear the bones in its wrist and fingers crunch and pop. The sound turned my blood to ice, and I was frozen in place. The face, though, was the most soul-crushing and fear-inducing thing I have ever seen. It slowly opened its mouth, and it got wider and wider as it smiled maniacally, with spit, blood, and half-broken teeth hanging from its mouth. It reached up to its mouth and ripped the tooth from its socket, and the pop echoed in the darkness and throughout the house. And somehow, his smile got larger. He then proceeded to flick the tooth at me, and I ducked to avoid it. When I looked back, though, he was gone. I wish this was my last time to see him, but unfortunately not. He comes back regularly, and every time he flicks the tooth at me before vanishing. I came to learn many members of my family have been visited by him throughout their lives, and even as far back as my grandfather when he was just a boy. The problem is, he has a special interest in me, and I am the only one he has flicked teeth and broken parts of himself at in the dead of the night. The reason I'm writing this now is because when he smiled on his last visit, he only had 4 large, deformed, rotten teeth left. In my heart I know, when he reaches the final tooth, something awful is going to happen. I don't know where to turn or what to do, but if I make it out of this and find some answers, I'll be sure to inform everyone. Especially those who might be terrorized by him too, or the people that he might have on his list to visit next. Night alone. When I was 14, my parents left me home alone one night. They were going to a party that was just for adults and would be gone for quite a long time. I had already been staying home by myself without a babysitter for a while, so this was nothing unusual. The other choice would have been to go over to my grandparents' house, but I really didn't want to do that. They left rather early, and I knew that they would be home really late. That didn't bother me, as it likely wouldn't bother any teenager. I was getting the whole house to myself for a while. The thing I remember most about that day was how windy it was. It began when I was at school. The wind had begun picking up and howling throughout the day. By the time I had gotten off of school and was on my way home, it had to be close to 20 miles per hour. It was difficult as hell trying to walk home in it, but once I got home, everything was fine. About an hour after my parents had left, I heard our doorbell ringing. I went downstairs to answer the door. I opened it up and there was a strange man that I didn't know standing at the door. "Hey, can I speak to your parents?" he asked me, smiling. "My mom's indisposed of at the moment," I responded. You know, when I was 14, I thought that sounded like the most clever thing I could tell the guy. I thought it sounded convincing, but I think we all know that it wasn't. Well, is your dad home? He asked. I'm selling these discount books for a restaurant downtown and would need to speak to an adult about them. I told the guy my dad was at work and would be there late. Yeah, looking back, another mistake. At work, but leaving off would be there late would have been a much better choice. The man thanked me and left. I closed the door and locked it. I then went back upstairs to watch television in my bedroom. I'm not sure how long I lay there on the bed, watching TV. I was also listening to the sound of the wind outside. There's something I really enjoy about that. Some people like rainy days or snowy days. I have always liked windy days. I heard a crash outside. Getting up, I ran to the side window and looked out it. It was already dark, but it looked like it was one of our garbage cans that got knocked over by the wind. Although it had startled me at first, this wasn't unusual on a windy day. I decided I would wait for the commercial, and then I would go pick the can up. As I was watching my TV show, I kept hearing a lot more noises as the wind kept blowing things around. I kept telling myself that the garbage can could wait. But the more noise I heard, the more I realized what kind of mess would be waiting for me if I waited much longer. So I gathered myself up and was prepared to go and clean up the garbage can. I walked out of my bedroom and down the hallway. I made it down 3 stairs before I stopped. One of the lights downstairs was on. That wasn't enough to make me stop, though, as it was very possible that I had left it on. But nothing I could have done could have accounted for the shadow that I saw moving on the opposite wall. Someone was in our home. I waited for a moment, trying to determine if I had made enough noise to be noticed. But whatever the person was doing, they were not coming towards the stairs. I decided that whatever noises I had been making must have been covered up by the noise of the wind. So I very slowly began to walk backwards up the stairs, and once I got to the top, I crept back into my bedroom and quietly closed and locked the door. I went to my closet because I figured that in addition to the wind, that would further muffle the sound. I then called the police and let them know some intruder was in my house. It was a nightmare waiting for them to show up. It probably seemed much longer to me than it actually was, but I simply remained in the closet. The wind was still making noise, and I was at times unsure whether the noise was coming from the house or from the wind. With how loud the wind was, the guy could have probably made it all the way up the stairs without my knowing it. However, the police arrived and apprehended him before he had any chance of coming to get me. Not that, in retrospect, do I think he had any intention of getting me. I think he thought that the noise from the wind was enough to mask his break-in. And it would have been, too, if it hadn't been for that garbage can being knocked over. Oh, and yeah, it was the supposed salesman from earlier. When you're young and home alone, be careful who you let know you're home alone. Drive home. I've only had one really scary experience that I can remember, and there is no way that I can really understand or explain what happened. This happened when I was in college. It was the beginning of the winter break, and I was driving back to my parents' house for the holidays. It was quite a drive, too. I had a really old Mustang LX that I had fixed up. Although my car was really shabby looking, it was extremely reliable, and it would take me through the many states that it took me to get home. Now, the only issue I had with driving home was that I was one of those people who would keep driving to see how far I could get. And when I did that, I would often get so very tired that it was dangerous to drive. but I had money for a motel each night. On the second day, I was driving through the mountains. This was a while back, before everyone had smartphones and the ability to check the weather all the time. It was an extremely windy day, and that of course made driving much more difficult. But I was determined to still make good time, so I kept driving well into the night without making many stops. By the time I was finally tired, I was unable to find a motel. When I finally came across a sign that told me where the next motel was, I think I recall that it was at least 70 miles away, and my eyes were already beginning to close on their own. There was no way that I would be able to make it the entire way. Eventually, although I knew it wasn't a safe thing to do, I had to pull my car off the side of the road and try to get some sleep in the car. I had done it before, a few times, when I had been out drinking, So, I knew that I would be able to get some rest, get back up and get on my way. The only thing that I was worried about was a car driving by that night, and the wind being too rough for them too. I would hate to be hit like that. But that was a chance I had to take, or I might have fallen asleep at the wheel myself. I pulled the car over and climbed into the back seat. I want to explain what it was like being in the car, in that weather. It was rough. The wind was constantly shaking the car, and every now and then there would be a really strong burst of wind that would really rock the car hard as it howled throughout the mountains. I was fortunate that I liked that sort of weather, so I was able to rest through it. It didn't take long for me to fall asleep, but the wind did cause me to wake up every now and then, but it was easy to fall back asleep. One of the times that I woke up, it felt a little different for some reason. I guess it's hard to explain if you weren't there, but if you have ever been asleep in a car when it's windy outside, you might know what I mean. I didn't feel like it was the shaking of the car that woke me up. It seemed like something else. Now, keep in mind how exhausted I was. I looked around the windows of the car, trying to wipe the blurriness out of my eyes, and by the time I did, I noticed something that I could not explain. On the window, by where my feet were, which was facing the road, there was something tapping on my window. It looked like a finger, but I wasn't sure. But it was tapping over and over on the window. At first I didn't do anything. I was too scared to move. I don't really believe in cryptids or anything of that nature. My thought was that it was probably a person. Although what person and why that person would be doing such a thing I did not know. As I lay there, I wondered what to do. I looked around the car to see if I could find anything to use as a weapon. There was a tire cross under the passenger seat of the car. I knew that would have to do if I needed it. I just watched the finger, or whatever it was, tapping on my window. I looked over at the locks, and they were locked. So all I did was close my eyes and keep the blanket over my head. I had the tire iron with me, and if someone or something broke into my car, I would have the element of surprise. Occasionally, my car would rock back and forth. I was never sure if it was because the wind or if something was rocking it, but the break-in never happened. And eventually, when I began looking out, I didn't see the finger or anything. I carefully scooted myself quietly into the front seat of the car. I was expecting to see someone or something as I quickly started the car and hit the gas. I then expected to see someone standing behind the car as I drove away, but there was nothing. I just drove and drove until I was able to find a motel, and when I did, I got myself a room. I slept like crap though, wondering all the time what had happened to me out on that road. Boat. The worst thing to ever happen to me happened to me due to my pure stupidity. Hell, I'm not afraid to admit that. I can take responsibility for the bad things I have done. This happened in the very late fall in Lake Michigan. My friend Todd and I decided that we were going to take our boat out on the lake. We shouldn't have. It was way late in the year to do it, and it was pretty windy that day. But we decided that it would be just adventurous for us, and we went out to do it. We knew it was going to be super windy. Like I mentioned, that was the point. But once we were out and far enough from shore, the wind simply picked up more and more. It got much worse than either of us had expected. Due to the ferocity of the wind, we decided that we needed to get the boat to shore as quickly as possible, so we headed in that direction. But the wind was strong, and the boat was small, and there were times when I didn't think we would make it. Well, Todd took the wheel, and I went under the deck to get some jackets for us. It was getting cold outside, and I thought it would help us against the wind. While I was down there, I found enough gear for us to try and keep warm. But when I came back up again, Todd was no longer at the wheel. I looked around on deck and I didn't see him anywhere. I called out his name in panic and tried to tell him that if he was playing a joke on me, this wasn't the time. But he wasn't there. He was not on the boat. Quickly, I began scanning the lake around the boat. I thought it was possible that he got hit by a gust of wind and was knocked overboard, but I couldn't find him. I stopped the boat, turned it around to search back the area that we had traveled over, looking for him in the water. I called out for him. He had a life jacket on, so I hoped that I would have been able to find him. I searched and I searched, but there was nothing. There was no sign of him. There was no life jacket. There was no body. There was nothing. He was simply gone. I didn't want to go back to shore at that time. I wanted to keep searching for him, and I did. I kept looking, going over and over, around and around, trying to find my friend. Hell, I ended up in places that we hadn't traveled in, thinking the wind and current may have taken him away. For hours and hours I searched, and I was not able to find him. Eventually I had to give up. I had to report what happened. He was never found, though. But as huge as the lake is, it has to be easy for someone to disappear on it. I can't tell you how it feels to not only lose your friend in the middle of a huge lake and to be responsible for it, but the feeling of utter defeat when I realized I would never find him and had to give up the search. To this day, I am terrified of both the water and the wind. The Lost Treehouse. My cousin Joey and I were the type who really loved to go out and explore wherever we could. When I was 11, I actually moved out to stay with his family for about a year. It was the first time really that I had hung out with him. He was on my dad's side of the family, and for some reason, before my parents got divorced, we didn't spend much time with Dad's side of the family. I honestly have no idea why, looking back on it. But my parents separated when I was 11, and that is why I went to stay with him for a while the divorce was going on. So Joey and I then began exploring the area where he lived. It was rural, which was a very new thing for me, having always been in the city. However, it didn't take long until we had explored just about every place around there, and exploring became redundant. When I was 15, though, my aunt bought a new house. Well, it was new for her. The house was, in actuality, a lot older than the one she previously had lived in. But it was also in a whole new area, and there were tons of hills, forests, and hollows for me and Joey to explore whenever I would come to visit. And so it was that when I was 15, on my very first day exploring this new area, that I had the scariest experience of my life up to that point. Joey had promised to wait until my first visit to do any exploring, and I was positive that we would have a lot of area to explore. When my dad pulled the car off the road, out of town, onto the gravel road, we drove on that road for nearly an hour before we came to my aunt's house. There were very few homes along the way, just a lot of hills and trees. Joey and I decided to make a full day out of our rural exploration. We brought a compass and some string to mark trees as we went along. Since we were completely new to this area, there was so much better of a chance of us getting lost. So we were having a pretty good day right into the afternoon. Truly, the area was much more interesting than that which I'd experienced before. There were different kinds of trees and animals. Hell, I actually heard and saw a woodpecker for the first time in my life. Unfortunately, however, he didn't have a goofy laugh or engage in any zany antics. But all in all, we were having a good time. We noticed something odd in the late afternoon. We couldn't tell what it was until we got close to it. But when we did, both of us were surprised to see an old tree house built into a really large trunk tree. It was weird because there were not any homes or anything anywhere close to the area, and tree houses were mainly a thing for children. So it seemed odd to see one out in the middle of the hills and forest like that. There wasn't a ladder or anything to get up into the tree house. However, we were both good tree climbers, so we were able to make our way up the branches of the tree. From there, we were able to get into the door of the structure, and right away, we almost wished that we hadn't. The inside of that treehouse was something out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre meets the Blair Witch Project. The floor of the treehouse was covered in bones, which we figured had to be animal bones due to their size. There were little figurines and things made of tying bones together with feathers and strings and things like that. Plus there were symbols and words painted all over the inside of the house. And no, I don't mean things like pentacles. Those are not evil things. There was graffiti hailing and praising evil entities and words in other languages. But the worst thing was something we found, sitting on a small wooden stand. It was a really old journal of some sort. Most of it was unreadable, really. Who knows how long it had been sitting there. We flipped through and tried to read as much as we could. There were ghastly drawings of people being mutilated and tortured. The drawings had names and descriptions. Of course, we had no way of knowing if these were of real people or not, since we didn't know how long that book had been sitting there, so we didn't know when it was written. But if it was a plan on doing these things to these people, it was a really sick thing to read. I mean, they described disembowelments, quartering, and all sorts of grim and disgusting things in quite a bit of detail. It was some pretty sick crap. And we spent more time in the treehouse than we probably meant to. When we finally climbed down, it was turning into early evening. We started home immediately after that. We brought the book with us and one of the bone figurines. It was sort of sickening, but we wanted to show Joey's parents what we had found. We were pretty excited about the whole thing, I won't lie. I bet that is something obvious by us bringing the pieces back. But that doesn't mean that we weren't also a bit frightened. It would be an absolute understatement to tell you that we were scared. I mean, I don't know if it is really true that killers kill animals before moving on to humans, but it was obvious that whomever owned that treehouse must have killed plenty of animals. And even if they never killed a person, they had a book outlining how they would do it. We got a pretty weird reaction from Joey's parents. They took the book and the figurine from us. They basically told us that although it was okay for us to go exploring, we had to be careful, be mindful of other people's property, and to be careful when entering old, abandoned buildings. I don't know what became of the book and the figurine. I wish I did, because I think showing them while this story is being told would be awesome. But this happened a good 25 years ago, and my aunt claims to have no memory of it. Joey remembers, of course, but he never got a hold of the book and figurine again, so neither of us have any idea at all what happened to them. Shack. This didn't start out as an adventure to find an abandoned building. This was just a hiking trip, really. But it ended up with us finding an abandoned building and some pretty disturbing discoveries, too. You first have to understand that my grandma had my dad when she was very young. And then he had a kid, me, when he was very young. Around the same time that I was born, my grandma was only in her mid-30s. She had another child in that time, who was only a year older than me. So he was technically my uncle. However, I didn't see him as an uncle, and we were a lot more like brothers. So when this happened, I was 14, and my uncle Jason had just turned 15. Jason and I set off into the woods around my grandma's house one morning just to go hiking. We tended to do this quite often. There was a lot of country in that area that gave us vast areas to explore. We usually would begin early in the morning in order to cover as much ground as possible. Now, I'm not going to try and describe everything we did just to make this story longer. I'm sure you know that we were hiking through the woods, up and down hills, and we were doing it for quite a while. And it was in the late afternoon when we found this cabin or shack or something like that out in the woods. Of course, being the ages that we were, our curiosity made it impossible for us not to go in and check it out. Going inside, it was obvious that the cabin was abandoned, even more obvious than it had been from seeing it outside. There was nothing in it that was necessary for a person to live. There was no furniture at all. There were no appliances, not even rustic ones. And unlike most rickety old buildings you might find out in the woods, there wasn't much of anything inside it. But after a little looking around, we did find a little metal box in the one closet in the place. And it was that metal box that made us wish that we had minded our own business and never went into the shack to begin with. The box was full of pictures. They were pictures of kids, and while the majority of the pictures were fine, as we flipped through them, there were pictures of kids that we wished that we hadn't seen. There were some pictures of kids in their underwear, and there were some pictures of kids in even less than that. And in those pictures, the kids were obviously unhappy, and some were obviously crying. We weren't really sure what we had stumbled upon, but it was obvious these pictures were very old. We brought the box back to the house to give to our parents, just in case there was something that needed to be done about it. Like if whoever took those pictures was still on the loose. They turned them into the sheriff's office, and really never mentioned them again to either of us. We were teenagers at the time, but those pictures really freaked us out. They really made us wonder how easily it may have been for someone to have done something like that to us when we were younger. It wasn't an idea we cared to have. Night out. I was a very lucky kid to have a treehouse when I was growing up. We had a tree in our backyard that was absolutely perfect for setting a treehouse on it. Both of my parents thought it was a good idea, so my dad and I were able to build one from scratch. It was a nice-sized treehouse where several people could hang out in it with plenty of room. We built a rope ladder which could be pulled up into the treehouse after entering, and there was even a trap door. We got that idea from watching The Simpsons. Well, the whole idea of the treehouse probably came from The Simpsons, I guess. Well, I love that treehouse more than anything in the world. My best friend Toby and I would even have sleepovers in the treehouse. That was always the coolest thing because we had a little television, sleeping bags, snacks, comic books, you name it. And the best thing was that we were unsupervised when we were there. We did all the things you would expect kids in a treehouse to do. We made s'mores, we told ghost stories. It was awesome. It was a warm summer evening. Toby and I were planning a night over in the treehouse. We even were able to convince my parents to loan us a VCR overnight. We watched Freddy Krueger movies and it was very fun. As is usual with sleepovers, we obviously did not go to sleep right away. It got really late into the night, and that's when things got interesting. From being high up in the treehouse, we could see a lot of things, and that was the coolest part of all. We even had a small telescope that we used to spy on people. I always liked doing that. I think that there is a voyeur in all of us to a little extent, and I always found it very interesting that we could spy on people, and they had no idea, and never would, that they were being watched. The neighborhood was dark, and that was always the best part of the night. It made watching the movies much scarier. It also just enhanced everything. While a movie was playing in the background, we kept trying to find something interesting. And that's when I had my rear window moment. It wasn't far away though either. I noticed something across the street. There was a man on the side of one of the houses right across the street. It was a window in the back of the side, and he was using something to pry it open. Now, I knew the person who lived in that house. It was an elderly woman and she lived alone, so what I was witnessing was an attempted break-in. I got Toby's attention, and he noticed it too. But rather than keep quiet like I was doing, he yelled, "Holy crap!" so loud, it got the guy's attention. The burglar was now looking right at us across the street, and he realized what we were doing. The guy stood there for a moment. Then he must have decided that having witnesses to his crime was not a good thing. So he gave up and started to come across the street. He had some sort of tool in his hand. It was whatever he was using to try and get into the old woman's house. I realized our rope ladder was down, so I began pulling it up, and then I began yelling and screaming for my dad. The guy made it across the street and was in our yard. I got the rope ladder up before he got close enough to use it, but climbing the tree would not be the most difficult thing for him to do. The light in my parents' room came on, and my dad opened the window. He quickly saw what we saw. A strange man with some sort of crowbar had made it over to our treehouse and was trying to get up the tree. There was some rumbling in the house. Suddenly I heard a crash and realized my dad had knocked the screen out of his window, and he had his gun pointed right at the guy in the treehouse. My dad didn't fire, but he got the man's attention. My dad told him to get down off the tree and get out of our yard. If he climbed even one more inch, my dad would shoot him. For a moment, I really thought the man was going to try my father's limits. The moment between the threat and the man's next movement was tense. But finally, the guy jumped off out of the tree. He yelled some stuff at my father, and then he ran out of the yard. He was picked up by the police shortly after. I stopped having sleepovers in the treehouse for a while. It was just too scary to do, but eventually I went back to it. Graveyards. I like graveyards. I live next to one, actually. It's not gated off or anything. It's just a graveyard that sits on the side of the neighborhood that I live in. It is an older graveyard. It doesn't have any lights in it. It does have asphalt paths, however, wide enough for several people to walk side by side on one. I don't scare very well. I know a lot of people claim this in their scary stories. I tend to believe them all, since I am like that too. But I do sometimes get scared. when I'm walking around and it's really dark outside. So you probably see where this story is going. There are times when it is dark and quiet at night that I decide to go out and walk in that graveyard. It was always very dark. I mean, I could always see the path I was walking on, and I could see everything that was close to me, but it was always like seeing shadows and not objects. Well, anyway, this took place in the fall. I was a bit bored. I stay up usually pretty late into the night, and I was watching a movie. It was really windy outside, and I began hearing the wind blowing hard, making that whistling noise that it tends to make. I've always loved that sound so much. So of course, I decided that I would go and take a walk through the graveyard. It was cool. I wish that I was a better writer. If I was, I might be able to do a much better job as a writer to explain what it was like. But it seemed like everything in the world had paused. I really liked it. It was fun walking around there. While I was walking, I noticed something. When I got a little closer, I saw the shadow of a figure standing there in the path. It wasn't very close to me, and I knew it was a person too. At first I just assumed it was someone else out for a walk, but the person wasn't moving. He or she was just standing in place. I decided maybe it was somebody visiting a grave late at night, so I turned around and walked the other way. I figured for many reasons that it was not a good idea to bother someone who was in the cemetery in the middle of the night. After I walked away a while, I thought I heard something. Then I turned around, and I noticed that the guy was following me. Or at least he was walking in the same direction as me. And he was walking a bit quicker than me too. I sort of felt my heart jump just a little bit, just out of surprise. But it wasn't really bad. I have to admit to being mildly scared, but I really didn't think there was anything bad about the guy out there. He was walking quickly. It made me a bit uncomfortable, and I decided I would step to the side, walk a little slower and let him pass me up. It took a few moments, but yeah, he eventually caught up to me. And as he passed me, something hard touched my shoulder, and I realized he had tapped me with the flat side of a knife blade. And I almost didn't hear what he said to me, but I did. Get out now, if you know what's best for you. And then he turned around and walked back in the direction that he had come from, and I was shocked. It was such a strange exchange. He didn't hurt me, but he just did a very frightening thing instead. I was sitting there wondering, and I wasn't sure what I should do, but I guess it quickly became obvious. Get out of the damn cemetery. So I left. I went home quickly. The following day, since I was curious to see what he was doing in the graveyard, I went back and searched the area that he was in. I didn't see any signs of anything, so I have no idea to this day what he was doing and why he didn't want me there when he did it. I'll start this by saying that I'm somewhat psychic. I always have been. I can hear spirits and other entities, but rarely see them. Instead of forms, I can see energy, portals, and will see sparks of light instead of complete images. I have no doubt that our soul is separate from our bodies, and when someone dies, they can choose to stay earthbound or leave. A spirit who chooses to stay earthbound is the classic ghost that people will get glimpses of. However, it's not just human spirits that stay in the spirit realm, which is the fourth dimension. There are many more sinister things out there. I'm from the Midwest, Illinois to be exact. My grandparents bought a home in the country where they raised their kids, including my mother. We lived about 2 miles from them in town, and would visit them often at their country home. This home is a tri-level with no basement, but a lower level, which was my grandfather's TV watching area. The lower level also had a crawl space, which gave me a foreboding feeling. Ever since I can remember, that lower level made me uneasy. And let me say that when you feel like you are being watched, you are. This is what is known as the sixth sense. I always knew something was not right with this house, but couldn't put my finger on it, except for the lower level, and the shed out back really gave me the willies. When I was 14, I moved in with my grandparents due to my mother and I not getting along. My bedroom was what is referred to as the corner bedroom because it's in the corner of the upper level. My first night in that room, my eyes were constantly being drawn to the closet doors. The doors are the kind that have slats across the upper half, instead of being a solid door. I could feel something looking at me through those slats. I wasn't one of those kids who was always afraid of the closet, so it wasn't that. I could actually feel eyes on me at all times. Almost immediately after moving in, I would hear one of my grandparents walking up the wooden steps. I looked up to see who it was, and then no one would be there. This was daily. They would always tell me it's the old house settling. I didn't buy that crap at 14, and I don't buy it now at 44. Settling noises don't sound like footsteps. One day after school, neither of them were home, and I was home alone watching TV and eating a snack. The lower level was dark, and I knew something was at the bottom of the stairs, just watching me. I couldn't see it, but I can use my sixth sense and just know certain things. So I knew exactly where this entity was, and I knew it wasn't a human spirit. I also knew it was pure evil. I could feel it, and if you've ever felt pure evil, it's an icy cold feeling of pure terror. I don't know how I knew, but it started to charge up the steps, so I ran outside and sat waiting for someone to get home. I sat out there for hours. I told them what happened, but I was told it was nothing and not to be afraid. I was getting pretty pissed off at that point. I was a rebellious teen, and I wasn't going to accept all these cliche answers they were giving me, but they wouldn't say anything else about it. So, one night, I was up late while my grandparents were sleeping, and decided, even though I wasn't tired, I should try to sleep, because I had school in the morning. As soon as I laid my head on my pillow, the sleep paralysis started coming on. Plus, I had just laid down and wasn't even tired. I knew I was awake. I could hear my grandpa snoring, and could feel something moving out of my closet into the bed right beside me. You know that feeling you get when someone walks up behind you, but you don't really hear it? It's like the air changes or something. And that's how I can sense these things. Well, thank God I had my eyes closed, and I couldn't see what this was. I fear I would have died from a heart attack at 14 years old. I could feel this thing was very tall, and was looking down at me. It spoke only one sentence. "I'm watching you." My blood ran ice cold to the point where it was painful. It felt like shards of glass were flowing through my veins. I've had sleep paralysis before at my mom's house, and I knew if I tried hard enough to move my head from side to side that I could break it, and that's what I did. As soon as I was free, I ran screaming into my grandparents' bedroom, and from that night on, my grandmother slept with me every night until I moved out on my own. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that I found out the truth. When my grandparents bought the house, the lower level had an upside-down pentagram built into the tile. They didn't know what it was and just covered it over with carpet. The shed out back was used to breed ravens. The corner bedroom was the most haunted, with every single guest they had stay in there, having some kind of experience. and when my uncle was young, that was his bedroom, and every night he would have night terrors and would scream several times a night. Last year my grandfather died, and I flew home for a few days. I took pictures of the lower level and the crawl space. I showed a friend of mine, who is a psychic medium, a picture of the crawl space, and she started crying. She said a teenage girl was murdered and devil worship sacrifices in there, and then buried under the dirt. She could see her and feel her fear. It was horrible. She refused to look at any more pictures. I know the entity who was watching me was a demon, and I've asked my family to have the crawl space dug up, but they won't. If I ever inherit that house, that's the first thing I will do, and then maybe burn it to the ground. Hi Killer Orange Cat. I just wanted to start off by saying I'm a huge fan, and I really love your videos, but you probably hear that all the time, so I'll move on to my story. A while back my family and I used to live in this really old house. I was really young, so I don't really remember anything, except for what my family told me. The first night we slept there, the door was swinging back and forth, and they all had nightmares. It sounded like something out of a movie, so everyone had their own fair share of really scary stories while they were at that house. Not to mention my family and I are not superstitious at all, but we started to get really bad luck there, so eventually we moved to a different home. But my dad kept the house for his job, and it stayed vacant for a long time. Occasionally, we would go over there and clean it up a little. So one time, I was in my brother's old bedroom with my sister. We were facing each other and talking, and I felt a hard kick on my leg. So I turned around, but there was nothing there. I told my sister, and we were both really confused and creeped out, obviously. And my sister said my leg kinda jolted forward, as if something had kicked it. And then while we were standing there trying to figure things out, a picture fell off the wall that had been perfectly hanging there for years. Needless to say, my sister and I booked it down the stairs to tell our mom. Supposedly there were a bunch of nuns living in the house, and they all died in the home. Another time, when my sister was really little, she walked by my brother's room and saw a man with long, dark hair standing over my brother and watching him sleep. And then he disappeared. But now that my brother's all grown up, he looks just like the guy that was standing over my brother. My dad is the least superstitious person you may ever meet. He was in the basement, and he turned around and saw a blonde woman with a really scary face standing behind him and glaring. And then she disappeared after he blinked. Once my mom was sleeping, and she woke up and saw my dad playing with my brother in his crib. And she turned around and saw my dad sleeping next to her. The other guy was gone when she turned back around, which we think to be a jinn, which in our culture is something that was mentioned in the holy books, and people kind of took it out of context. This happened yesterday, and it was the most scary experience of my life. Yesterday I was bored, so I began wondering what to do. So I had an idea to go for a swim. I then went to the shed in my backyard and got a pool float, and then I started to go for a walk. I was going to walk up to the creek and go for a swim. When I arrived at the creek, I jumped into the water and started swimming. I was having a lot of fun, so I kept swimming. I told myself I was going to go as far as I can go, so I kept swimming, and I then swam under a bridge. After a good moment of time, I swam under another bridge, but like the other bridge, I saw nothing there. After a long time of swimming, it was starting to get dark. I was wondering if I should go back, but I did not go back. I kept swimming, and then I found another bridge. But I saw the most disturbing thing I ever saw in my life. I saw someone in the distance. I could not see at first, but then as I got closer, I saw someone hanging on a rope. The person had hung himself, and I went up to him to see if he was alive. I tapped on his shoulder, but he did not respond. I then tried feeling his pulse, but his heart did not beat. I began really freaking out, so I yelled, "Someone, call 911. There was a dead body." But no one heard me. I then had an idea to go to someone's house and tell them to call 911. So I walked out of the woods and I found an ice cream truck, and I told the ice cream man to call 911, and he did. The cops came very fast. After that, I told the cops where the body was and they found it. Let's just say, it was a really hard sleep that night. This happened when I was in the 9th grade. My church group used to go to a place called Silver Bay every Memorial Day, which is in upstate New York. Silver Bay has several hotel buildings, a gym, activities, an auditorium building, a church building, an ice cream shop, a cafeteria building, and several other buildings. One of the buildings just so happened to be abandoned. My friends and I looked at it for years and always wondered what was inside. Finally, one year, I asked my friends if they wanted to explore the building. At first they said no, but they ended up coming around to the idea, and they all wanted to. The first time we went, it was 3 of us, my friends Jack, Aiden, and I. We ended up finding a very old door. My friend Jack punched it down. Right away, we saw a small hallway. To the right, there was a staircase. The 3 of us went into the building and started to make our way up the first flight of stairs and onto the second, where at the top of the second flight of stairs, there was a door with a small window in it. And that's important later on. On the second flight of stairs, Aiden and I heard footsteps. We got scared then and we ran out of the building. We told the rest of our friends and we decided to go back later that night. We ended up going back, but with our full group. That would be Eric, Dylan N, Dylan H, Jack, Aiden, and I. We went the exact same way. On the second flight of stairs, Eric and I saw a really scary man on the other side of the door. I got the best look at him. He was a redhead, had a beard, had a bunch and raggedy clothes, and we were scared that we were found in the building. Scared, we all ran out of the building, and we were freaked out. No one was supposed to be in there. We were all freaked out and did not go back. We all went to the main building on campus and asked the front desk staff what the building was. They told us it was still in use. We knew that was a lie. The doors had locks on them, the type of locks you'd see on lockers at schools. We all went back to our hotel building and went to our rooms for the night. We ended up going back the next night, this time with 2 college kids. We went through the whole building, and there were no signs of any squatters. Here's where things take a creepy turn. The final day we were at Silver Bay, the president of my congregation, Paul, called us to the corner of the cafeteria with our parents. We were in trouble. A staff member had reported us for being at the abandoned building. We met with the owner of Silver Bay, Chad, later that morning. He told us every night a staff member does a sweep of the abandoned building. He told us there was no damage on Saturday night. The first time we went, it was Saturday afternoon. The staff reported and took pictures of kicked-in doors and smashed windows inside the building, and we hadn't done any of that. Something I wish I brought up too. I noticed worn-out sneakers, empty popcorn bags, and empty Coke bottles in a trash can next to the entrance, the one me and my friends went through. That should have been a red flag to us that people were in the building. The part of this that sends chills down my spine to this very day. For one of the Silver Bay meals, some of the members of my congregation sat with a man. They could tell something was off with him by his eye contact. They said he had no name tag on, which everyone at my congregation was required to wear at Silver Bay. He also told them he was living up the road from the Silver Bay campus in a place with no power, food, or water. He would read his Bible every night and pray. He was thankful he found Silver Bay because he could get free food, water, and stay in a place with power. 3 years later, this story still freaks me out. Dan. When I was in my 20s, I went through a very strange time in my life. I was living alone in an apartment and working at a consulting firm. It was great having a 9-to-5, Monday to Friday job with the weekends off. Before that, I'd only ever really worked in retail. So during this period of time, my private life got a whole lot easier to deal with. When I was younger, I was a bit of a clubber. I mean, Friday night at the suburban club and Saturday night in the city bar hopping. That was what I did practically every weekend. However, by the time this story happened, I was a bit tired of that scene. I was trying to meet people, go to restaurants, movies, or even just stay home and play video games. So I began talking to this guy named Dan, and our friendship was really weird from the beginning. He was a major homebody. I had been enjoying spending more time at home at this part of my life. He was into some new age sort of things, which I thought was also interesting at the time. But honestly, I think we were both just looking for friends at the time, and didn't have any real interest in being together. We had talked on the phone a lot, and the first time we met, I felt that we had a connection. I mean, this is really hard to explain. I was very attracted to him. He was tall and slim. He wore black all the time. Hell, I even discovered later on that even his underwear was black. But that's another story. But even though neither of us were interested in a relationship, we grew close, and he wanted to cuddle with me on this couch. Well, he got up to turn the light off, and when he did, I felt my nervous system sort of jump. I hadn't expected that to happen. And somehow, he felt what I felt, and described what happened to me perfectly. It was odd, and I have no explanation for it, and I really don't need one. I just felt connected to him. Although he was my age, he was very new to gay relationships. Dan had only been involved with women before. In a few months after our friendship began, he fell hard for a guy who he was talking to online. This guy lived in a different state, and supposedly the two of them decided that the guy was going to drive up to stay with Dan for a week. Well, on the day he was supposed to arrive, Dan called me, crying. He said his guy stopped halfway through the drive. He decided not to come, and the two of them argued on the phone, to the point where the guy, and I'm sorry I don't remember his name, threatened to kill himself, and stopped answering his phone. I went over to Dan's house to try and comfort him in any way that I could. It was awful. He was crying. He would be calling this guy on the phone. Occasionally the guy would answer. Dan would offer to drive down and pick him up, and the guy would refuse, and threaten to kill himself again before hanging up. It was a nightmare, and there wasn't much I could do other than hold my friend and be there for him. At one point in the night, he got up to get some water. I told Dan I would get it for him, but he insisted that he needed to get up and get out of bed to stretch his legs, so I let him go. The apartment was dark. It always was. I sat up in the bed, waiting for him to come back. After a while, I saw the outline of his shadow as he slowly walked down the hallway toward the bedroom. It wasn't until he was standing in the doorway of his bedroom that I saw Dan was holding a large knife in his hand. I jumped out of the bed and went over to him quickly. I had no fear that he was going to use the knife on me, but I was scared that he would use it on himself. I was too late, though. He had already slashed his left arm into ribbons. There was blood everywhere, and he was gushing it so quickly that I was convinced he was going to die. I was able to compress the many wounds as I called 911 on my own phone. An ambulance made it to the house, and he did recover. However, he spent 3 months in a psychiatric ward recovering. And here is the worst part. The guy he had done this over had never even left his home to come and see Dan. It was all an act. It was a sick and manipulative drama that was a game to this guy, and it nearly killed my friend. You have to be really careful about what you do online. Playing games can definitely be the death of someone.
Number 2. Bloody drink. When I was younger, and first had an opportunity to go to gay pride, I was caught up in it deeply. I was a teenager at the time, and over the next few years its appeal was still pretty strong to me. But as I got into my early 20s, it became a sort of hit or miss thing with me. What I mean is that I would go if I could get a group of friends to go with me, but if not, it wasn't really a huge loss for me if I didn't make it. But regardless, I always looked at Pride Month as both a good thing and something that I did enjoy. Of course, opinions actually vary a bit about this in the LGBTQ community. To some people, Pride is like Christmas every year. They wouldn't miss it for anything in the entire world. There are also those who are indifferent to it, and some who, for one reason or another, actually hate everything there is to do with gay pride. A few years back, I wasn't able to get any of my friends over for Pride Day. I was working a Monday through Friday job, and none of them were. I mean, really. Every one of my close friends were working on Sunday. So since I did not have to get up early the next morning to get a good spot for the parade, I decided to stay out late at the clubs the night before. Not having anyone to dance with, I spent most of my time sitting at the bar talking to the bartender, who I knew. I figured I was up for a night of nothing more than people watching, when I caught the eye of another guy at the bar. He was about my age, pretty cute, and I definitely didn't know who he was. After a while, the guy came over to where I was and we started talking. His name was Troy, and we hit it off pretty good. We talked for a while, and eventually, he asked me back to his place for a drink. I couldn't say I was in the habit of doing this all the time, but I decided to go ahead and go with it. He gave me directions before he left, and I let him know that I would be along. I arrived at his place and was a bit surprised. He owned a pretty big house, it seemed. He told me before that he lived alone, so I wondered what one guy would do in such an enormous place by himself. Going inside, he kept it lit dimly, which was what I noticed at first. He led me into a den and had a bar there, making me a drink. I took it and sat down on a cold leather couch, and he sat in a chair by me. There was something about him that was different at his home than at the club. "Do you want me to try something different?" he asked me. His tone of voice was a little suggestive and made me a bit uncomfortable. I simply nodded. That was when Troy went to the bar and took out a knife. He made a drink. I think it was gin. And then he slit his arm and let his blood leak into the glass. After that, he wrapped something around his arm. He picked up the blood drink and brought it over to me. "Wanna try it?" he asked me, offering me the glass. I shook my head. "Just not ready yet," Troy told me. That's okay. You will be. He then drank from the glass while he was talking to me. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I just talked to him while he drank the drink, and I waited until he got up to go to the bathroom. Then I immediately left the place before he came out. I just needed to get as far away as possible. He tried messaging me, but I never answered him. It was too weird and creepy an experience. With things like HIV out there, and the very fact that blood can be poisonous, I was too creeped out that a person like that even existed. It was awful.
Number 3. Mandy. This happened to me when I was still in high school. I was just beginning to suspect that I might either be a lesbian or bisexual during that time period. I guess that's a normal time for figuring that sort of thing out. I hadn't really figured, though, that I would explore it too much at those early stages of life, if it hadn't been for a male friend of mine. He was gay, and had agreed to be interviewed at the school newspaper, along with a girl who was bisexual. When I found out the girl was someone that we both knew, I very much wanted to talk to her about it. Her name was Mandy. She was a bit of a punk sort of girl. Her hair was always ending up different colors. She wore a lot of leather and went to a lot of concerts. This was far different from me, who either stayed home more of the time or hung out in the hallways after school. But we still sort of knew each other. We wrote some notes back and forth, using my gay male friend as the carrier of those notes. And I guess, as is the way that happens a lot with teenagers, we started developing feelings for each other rather quickly. Although we didn't have a lot of time to actually hang out and talk, mostly during gym class and after school, we communicated a whole lot through the notes and over the phone, and that worked pretty good for us. After a decent amount of time interacting like this, however, we both felt that we should probably spend some time alone to talk in person. So Mandy invited me over to hang out at her house one evening after school, with the idea that I would be spending the night over there. I was a bit surprised, but not in a bad way, that her parents and siblings were not at home that evening. Mandy's room was a lot like I assumed it would have been. She had covered the windows in duct tape so it was dark. She had a lot of posters of bands. She had a black light. She immediately began burning incense. It was very atmospheric. We had a really nice time talking. Our conversation went a lot deeper than it had before. And that was when Mandy revealed something to me. She told me that she was nervous to reveal this, but if I would be sleeping over, I would end up finding out anyway. She showed me plenty of bandages on her arms and on her legs, and when I asked why she had those, she said that she occasionally would cut herself out of frustration. She didn't want to scare me off, although I have to admit I was a bit put off by the idea. But I could understand that life could sometimes get really aggravating and frustrating, so perhaps that was just one of the things that made it easier for her to deal with it. We had a great evening for the rest of the time, and eventually we both went to sleep. We didn't fool around or anything like that, but we did end up sleeping in the same bed. At that point it had seemed like the perfect night, and then I woke up in pain. I wasn't sure what had happened, but something had hurt my arm really bad. I tried jerking it away from the pain, but something was holding it there. When my eyes adjusted, I saw Mandy was kneeling by the side of the bed, holding my arm and a knife. It took me only a few moments to realize that she had cut me, and it looked like she had cut herself again too. I struggled against her, and she quickly let go of my arm. I jumped out of the bed, asking her why she had done that. She was eerily calm about it. She explained that she wanted me to know how it felt to be cut. That she, in fact, liked the feeling and wanted me to like it too. She was too nervous earlier to bring up the possibility of asking me to do it, so she did it to me while I was asleep. It was way too weird. I told her I had to leave. She tried very hard to get me to change my mind, but that wasn't happening. I was too freaked out. I gathered my things and went out the door. She could tell I was upset and didn't follow me. I went to a payphone and called my parents. Mandy apologized over and over again. I let her know that I accepted her apology, but I also didn't really want to pursue a relationship with her anymore. It was too weird and scary after that. She persisted for a while, trying to get me to change my mind, but it didn't happen. We went back to really just being acquainted. That was many years ago, and I have no idea what's happened to her since.
Number 4. Strange date. When I was in college, I lived in the dorms in my freshman year. I was fortunate, however, because I was able to actually rent a full apartment. The dorm at NIU was called Douglas Hall, and it had a few full apartments on the top floor. I had a huge scholarship, so was able to afford the price of the room. Of course, in college I decided I was going to live free and do a whole lot of things. Okay, I guess I'm trying to find a delicate way to put it that I was sleeping around a whole lot. Basically, I was a bit of a slut in college. There, I said it, and not particularly proud or ashamed of it. I did have a really weird experience though. Me and this other guy, Jake, were both dating the same guy. It wasn't a huge deal, because the guy didn't ever say our relationship was exclusive, but we both stopped seeing that guy. Then Jake and I began talking a lot. He lived pretty far away, about a 90-minute drive, but we got along pretty well and he was cute, so I invited him to come over. We clicked immediately. Jake was pretty smart, but he skipped going to college. He had never been on a campus before, but he really loved it. I could tell he was overwhelmed by the sheer number of people on campus. After eating, I invited him back to my dorm room. We had to walk through the entire dorm to get to my room. Jake was again very interested in the culture, people in the dorms with their doors open and walking around in their underwear in co-ed dorms. He seemed fascinated. We played games and talked until late into the night. I was trying to seduce Jake, but he was a bit weird about it. I guess I was trying to get him to make the first move, but he wasn't biting. So I told him it was too late for him to drive home and that he could stay there overnight. We went into the bedroom, I changed clothes, and Jake did the weirdest thing though. He actually went over to the window. There was a lamppost outside the window and there was a swarm of bugs, and he stared at it. I stripped down to my boxers and Jake simply stood at the window. He didn't move, he didn't talk. All he did was stare out. I was a bit unnerved. I picked up a textbook and read it a little. I had wanted him to get undressed and to get into bed with me, but he didn't. He just continued to stand there at the window. He didn't move or look at me in any way. I wanted to ask him to get into bed somehow, but he was so strange looking at that light. He may have been standing there for over an hour, completely not moving. Finally, he asked me what he should wear to bed. He told me he didn't bring any PJs or anything because he wasn't expecting to spend the night. I told him to sleep in his underwear. He stripped down to a pair of silk boxers and climbed into bed with me. I guess when looking at things he was probably nervous and socially awkward, but it was so creepy how he stood there for nearly an hour staring at that light. Nervous or not, he was really good in bed. Jake and I continued to talk for a while. We never talked about his behavior that night though, and to this day I still have no idea what happened.
Number 5. Pizza. I came out of the closet in high school. Well, it wasn't really that I came out of the closet, as much as I just refused to be anyone other than me. I don't think that now, or even back then, if you would have seen me, or even hung out with me, you would have assumed that I was gay immediately. But if I see a hot guy, I'm gonna obviously check him out, and I won't pretend to be someone that I'm not. For the most part, I didn't have much trouble in high school, though. This was back in the early 90s, and although tolerance still had a long way to go, it was at least on its way. However, there was one group of guys who decided that they had to give me a hard time about it. They would call me names. One of the guys would actually sometimes get up on my face and growl at me. And no, I'm not kidding. He would actually do that. But they never laid their hands on me or anything like that. When I was 17, I got a job delivering pizzas after school. My parents had bought me a really nice car as a birthday present, and I needed money to pay for gas and insurance. The pizza place I worked for was really nice, and even to this day, I have fond memories of it. So anyway, this story takes place on a Friday night. I was working, and it was just coming close to the end of the evening. I had a few orders that I had to deliver, and then my day would be over. One of the houses that I pulled up to was completely new to me. I hadn't ever delivered there before. When I opened the door, I was taken aback. A very sexy guy of about my age answered the door, and he gave me the once-over, and immediately took on a really flirtatious behavior with me. Although I didn't intend on fraternizing with customers, I have to admit I was very attracted to him. He didn't have his wallet on him, and he invited me into the house, so he didn't have to keep the door open. Another thing I seldom do is go into someone's home, but again, he was flirting with me, and I was enjoying that. But seated in the living room of the house were the other 4 guys from school, the ones who always gave me shit for being gay. And that was when I assumed I'd been duped. The guy who always growls in my face got up and shoved me up against the wall, and things would have gotten really bad after that. However, being a young gay guy in the early 90s, when gay bashing was more prevalent than it is nowadays, I did make sure I had something to protect me. As the guy held me up against the wall, I grabbed the pepper spray out of my pocket and sprayed it all over his face. Another guy tried to come at me, and he got sprayed too. Fortunately for the other guys and the cute guy, they didn't try, and I opened the door, got out to my car, and quickly left. I drove back to the pizza parlor, and my boss called the police. The guys couldn't deny the story because of the pepper spray. All of them got into serious trouble. Be careful, and don't ever feel bad about carrying something to protect yourself.
Number 6. Balcony. There was a Pride weekend when I decided not to go to Pride. It was a regular thing for me, but I was feeling pretty lonely. I didn't have anyone to go with me though, and I didn't want to just be alone there. So this was a long time ago. This happened before smartphones, so there were not any apps like Grindr or anything. I think it was Planet Out that I was using. I found this guy who was very interesting to me. He lived in a high-rise building in Chicago and apparently lived in the highest priced area. I decided to meet, and he invited me to his apartment. I don't remember the name of the building, but it was very tall. He lived on the 19th floor, which I found a bit amusing, because Fraser lived on the 19th floor. I am deathly afraid of heights, but I wasn't worried about that. I would just not go towards his window. The guy's name was Joffrey, and no, I'm not kidding, of course this happened long before Game of Thrones, but fortunately he let me call him Jeff. We went out to eat. He was super talkative when we were out. That was fine, because I liked talking. He invited me back to his apartment. When we got there, he went into the bathroom for a while. He came out, and he was a lot less energetic. It was weird how quickly his mood changed. He became very quiet and sluggish. It turned out Jeff was a pill popper. He told me he had taken a stimulant before, and he was worried that he was talking too much. So in the bathroom, he took a depressant. He took a lot of conflicting pills that day. Jeff was very forward and seemed to like me a lot. We went on a few dates, and each time we went back to his high-rise apartment, his moods were always changing based on how many pills he was taking. Jeff one day told me that if I would be his boyfriend, I would never have to worry about money again. I know a lot of people may have jumped at the chance, but not me. It was a total turn-off. And I was at his apartment, and I think he could tell I was not too happy about the offer. Jeff went into the bathroom again, and I guess he was taking pills in order to change his mood. When Jeff came out, he seemed more aggressive than usual. He wanted me to go out onto his balcony, but I didn't want to. I told him I was terrified of heights, but he really wanted me to do it, and was being quite forward about it. I didn't want to upset him. So he opened the door, and I slowly stepped onto the balcony with a glass of wine. Then immediately when I did, he quickly closed and locked the sliding glass door. Panic gripped me fast. I told you I was scared of heights. Well, damn, I was terrified, and even though I knew I shouldn't, I looked down. Agree to be my boyfriend and I'll let you back in, Jeff demanded. I got dizzy and actually fell to my knees. I was 19 stories up in the air and was absolutely gripped by fear and panic. My fear intensified and took over, making me imagine myself falling off the balcony. There was nothing for me to grab onto either. I was on my hands and knees, and I had to keep my eyes closed. I actually began crying and finally told him that I would be his boyfriend if he let me back in. I don't believe you, Jeff told me. I think I need you to be out there a little bit longer before I believe you. I pleaded with him. It was so hard for me to tell you how scary this was. I have never been so frightened in my life. I get scared watching YouTube videos where people climb buildings. After a while, I just curled up into a ball crying from fear. I was out there for a long time before Jeff finally opened the door and let me back in. His mood had changed again, and he was now begging me to forgive him. He blamed everything on the pills and told me he would never do anything like that again. I punched him. He fell down and I immediately left for the elevator. He came after me, begging, but I made it without him. I never spoke to him again. Anyone who would expose someone to their greatest fear is not someone I ever wanted to talk to.
Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell below, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.